Section 4 of National Geographic Magazine, Volume 2, Numbers 1 and 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Larry Wilson. Report Geography of the Land by Herbert G. Ogden, Part 1. In my annual report a year ago, I presented to you briefly our knowledge of the great geographic divisions of the world. It might be instructive to continue the subject this evening by relating the additional information we have acquired during the year. But as the items are not of great value, and the most important are more in the form of rumors than of facts, I have restricted myself more to the interests of the Western Hemisphere, and particularly to those affecting the United States. In Europe we have still the visions of war that have agitated her peoples for years past. The decapitation of the Turk and division of his European empire to appease the ambition of friendly powers. It is not until we pass by this civilized section and reach the Far East that we recognize the dawn of progress in the year, the birth of events that may in time increase the happiness and welfare of many people. The influence of the United States in extending the principle so early enunciated, that all men are born free and equal, has been most marked. The Western Hemisphere is virtually under the rule of men chosen by the people, and though we cannot claim that in all instances the result has been satisfactory, there has nevertheless been a steady advance. Political disturbances have become less frequent, and with prolonged tranquility the arts of peace, commercial enterprise, and internal improvements have received an impetus that will wed more strongly the advocates of personal liberty to their ideal God. Educated men in both hemispheres predict ultimate success or failure for our form of government, and advance cogent arguments in the support of the views they express. The complications of the great economic questions that confront us afford texts for arguments that cause many to doubt the wisdom of entrusting the welfare of a great nation to the votes of the masses. Nevertheless, the people are firm in the belief that they can conduct their own affairs, and those whom they entrust with temporary power are seldom so short-sighted as not to realize that a violation of the trust will meet with certain retribution. Those appointed to govern must also be teachers, and if in the enthusiasm of a new creed it shall be shown they have taught the people error instead of truth, a national uprising sweeps them from control, and for a time conservatism becomes the guide. To the people of the Old World, the apparent prosperity that has followed our system doubtless receives the most earnest thought, and the contrast to their own condition excites their desires to experiment themselves in more liberal forms and reap the rewards they believe have followed such measures in America. While American methods may extend their influence in this manner to European nations, and even to the nations of Asia, we should not rest self-confident of the superiority of our institutions, and that they alone are the permeating influence that inspires so many with the thoughts of liberal government that brings disquiet to crowned heads. The application of recent discoveries and inventions to the affairs of everyday life have raised the power of the individual and caused such a general increase of intellectual vigor that independence of rulers by divine right is no longer a cause for wonder, but is considered by the intelligent as the natural state for the modern man. Since the expedition of Commodore Perry, our influence in Japan has been marked, and the most progressive of the Eastern nations has sought counsel and advice from New America and the men who constitute the nation. But the progressive people of these isles have been too earnest in their efforts to advance, to rely solely upon one set of men, or the example of one nation, and we find that they have been gathering in that which is good from all sections of the civilized world. The record of their progress, however, bears the stamp of America, and we may justly claim that it was the influence of freedom that first led these interesting people into the paths they have followed with such gratifying results, and which many believe will culminate in the establishment of a powerful and enlightened nation. Recent advices announce the formation of a legislative body, organized on the principles of the Congress of the United States, a step that indicates Japan may yet find a place in the category of states that are destined to exert a marked influence in the control of human affairs. How different is the neighboring empire of China! Within a stone's throw almost of the advancing civilization of Japan, inhabited by a people of marked ability, but restricted by race traditions to a condition of inactive conservatism that seems almost to preclude the possibility of material advance in centuries to come. The population of this empire is so great that the density has been averaged at 200 and 300 persons per square mile, and in some districts that it is as great as 700. We can readily conceive the poverty that must exist in such an average population for such an extended area. And we may realize the cries of distress that come from great calamities by the experiences in our own history, even modified as they have been by our superior facilities for affording relief, and the comparative insignificance of the numbers who have required assistance. Recall for a moment one of the great floods of the Yellow River, where thousands have perished and tens of thousands have been rendered destitute within a few hours, and conceive the sufferings, hardships, and greater number that must yet succumb before those who survived the first great rush of the waters can be furnished relief. Remembering that the means of intercommunication are the most primitive, and that the immediate neighbors of the sufferers are in no condition to render more assistance than will relieve the most urgent necessities of a comparatively insignificant number. May we not then, if only from a humanitarian point of view, greet with pleasure the reception of the imperial decree authorizing the introduction in the empire of useful inventions of civilized man, and directing the construction of a great railroad through the heart of the empire, with Peking as one of the termini? This road will cross the Yellow River, affording relief to this populous district in time of disaster, and it is understood will eventually be extended to traverse the empire, forming a means of rapid communication between distant provinces. We may believe also that in time it will be the medium of opening to us a new region for geographic research, not in the Celestial Empire alone, but also in the rich fields of Central Asia that are now being occupied by Chinese immigration. Doubtless the greatest geographic discoveries of the age have been made in Central Africa. It was but a few years ago that we were in doubt as to the true sources of the Nile, and the location of the mouths of the great rivers that had been followed in the interior was as much a mystery as though the rivers had flowed into a heated cauldron, and the waters had been dissipated in mist by the winds to the four corners of the earth. It was then that grave fears were aroused for the safety of Livingstone, who had done so much, and whose efforts it was hoped would yet solve the great geographic problems his travels had evolved. A man patient in suffering, and with a tenacity of purpose that overcomes the greatest obstacles, he had endeared himself to those who sought knowledge from his labors, and it was therefore with unfeigned regret that men spoke of the possibility that calamity had overtaken him, and that the work of the last years of his life would possibly be lost. The editor of an influential New York journal, sympathizing with the deep interest that was felt, and doubtless actuated to some extent by the notoriety success would bring to his journal, determined upon organizing an expedition to ascertain Livingstone's fate, and thus brought before the world the hitherto obscure correspondent Henry M. Stanley. The rare good judgment that selected Mr. Stanley for the command of such a hazardous expedition was more than demonstrated by subsequent events. The first reports that Livingstone had been succored were received with incredulity, but as the facts became known, incredulity gave way to unstinted praise, and Mr. Stanley was accorded a place among those who had justly earned a reward from the whole civilized world. A few years after his return from his successful mission for the relief of Livingstone, he was commissioned in the joint interests of the New York Herald and London Daily Telegraph to command an expedition for the exploration of Central Africa. Traversing the continent from east to west, he added largely to our knowledge of the lake region, and was the first to bring us facts of the course of the Congo. This expedition placed him before the world as one of the greatest of explorers, and it seems therefore to have been but natural that when a great humanitarian expedition was organized nearly 10 years later to penetrate into the still unknown regions of the equatorial belt for the relief of Emin Pasha, that he should have been selected to command it. How faithfully he performed this task we are only just learning, and our admiration increases with every new chapter that is placed before us. That he was successful in the main object of the expedition is self-evident, having brought Emin Pasha and the remnant of his followers to the coast with him. The expedition has also been fruitful in geographic details, and though we have not as yet the data to change the maps to accord with all the newly discovered facts, we may feel assured of their value. Perhaps the best summary of the more important discoveries can be given in the explorer's own words, which I have taken from one of his recent letters. Over and above the happy ending of our appointed duties, we have not been unfortunate in geographical discoveries. The Aruwimi is now known from its source to its bourne. The great Congo forest, covering as large an area as France and the Iberian Peninsula, we can now certify to be an absolute fact. The mountains of the moon, this time beyond the least doubt, have been located, and Ruwenzori, the Cloud King, robed in eternal snow, has been seen and its flanks explored and some of its shoulders ascended, Mounts Gordon Bennett and McKinnon Cones being but great sentries warding off the approach to the inner area of the Cloud King. On the southeast of the range, the connection between Albert Edward Nyanza and the Albert Nyanza has been discovered, and the extent of the former lake is now known for the first time. Range after range of mountains has been traversed, separated by such tracts of pasture lands as would make your cowboys out west mad with envy. And right under the burning equator we have fed on blackberries and bilberries and quenched our thirst with crystal waters fresh from snow beds. We have also been able to add nearly 6,000 square miles of water to Victoria Nyanza. Our naturalist will expatiate upon the new species of animals, birds, and plants he has discovered. Our surgeon will tell what he knows of the climate and its amenities. It will take us all we know how to say what new store of knowledge has been gathered from this unexpected field of discoveries. I always suspected that in the central regions, between the equatorial lakes, something worth seeing would be found, but I was not prepared for such a harvest of new facts. The exploration of Africa, however, has not been confined to the central belt. Expeditions have been developing the southern section of the continent. The French have been active in the watershed of the Niger, and in the east there seems to have been a general advance of English, Germans, Portuguese, and Italians. The latter, it is stated, have acquired several million square miles of territory in Mozambique, an acquisition that would indicate our maps have heretofore given this particular division of territory an area much too insignificant. We also learn that Captain Trevier, a French traveler, has crossed the continent by ascending the Congo to Stanley Falls, thence southeasterly through the lake region to the coast at some point in Mozambique, a journey of 18 months, a journey that must bring us a harvest of new facts. On the Western Hemisphere there has been considerable activity in a variety of interest, tending to develop the political, commercial, and natural resources. 4 new states have been admitted to the American Union, and measures have been introduced in the Congress looking to the admission of 2 more. These acts mark an era of the progress of the great Northwest, significant of a national prosperity that a generation ago would have been deemed visionary. We have also to record a tentative union formed by the Central American states, that at the expiration of the term of 10 years prescribed by the compact, we may hope will be solidified by a bond to make the union perpetual. In South America, a bloodless revolution presented to the family of nations a new republic in the United States of Brazil. All thoughtful men must at least feel a throb of sympathy for Dom Pedro, who in a night lost the allegiance of his people and the rule of an empire. Sympathy, perhaps, that he does not crave, for history affords us no parallel of a monarch who taught his people liberalism, and knowing it could but lead to the downfall of his empire. It seems to be true also that although depriving him of power, the people whom he loved and ruled with such liberality have not forgotten his many virtues, and that the Emperor Dom Pedro will be revered in republican Brazil as heartily as though his descendants had been permitted to inherit the empire. We cannot tell if the new order of affairs will prove permanent, but the education of the Brazilians in the belief that a republic was inevitable gives strong grounds to hope the experiment of self-government will not be a failure. The influence the successful establishment of this republic is to exert in other parts of the world is a problem that has already brought new worries to the rulers of Europe, and not without reason, for a republican America is an object lesson that the intelligence of the age will not be slow to learn. The assembly of the Three Americas Congress in Washington is also an event that may wield an influence in the future. Perhaps it may not be seen for years to come, but it lays the foundation for commercial and geographic developments that would redound to the credit of the Western Hemisphere. We have seen during the year the virtual failure of the Panama Canal Company, for it is unreasonable to believe that a corporation so heavily involved with such a small proportion of its allotted labor accomplished can secure the large sum that would be requisite to continue operations to completion. The failure of this company has imparted a fresh impetus to the Nicaragua scheme, and ground was broken on this route in October last. As the Nicaragua route presents many natural advantages and is free from such stupendous engineering works as were contemplated at Panama, we may hope for its completion. The surveys were conducted with deliberation and have evidenced great skill on the part of those who supervise them, so that we may reasonably expect the construction will proceed with the same care, and resolve the question of success into the simple problem of cost. A partial account has been furnished by Dr. Nansen of his journey across Greenland a year ago. The result will be disappointing to those who anticipated the discovery of open country with green fields and the general reversal of the Arctic conditions. He describes the region as being covered with a great shield of ice, dome-like in shape, and which he estimates to have a maximum thickness of 6,000 or 7,000 feet. For a great part of his journey he traveled at an elevation of about 8,000 feet, and the cold at times was so intense that he believes the temperature must have been at least 50 degrees below zero on the Fahrenheit scale. No land was visible in the interior, and he estimates the highest mountains must be covered with at least several hundred feet of snow and ice. The expedition was one of great danger, and we may say was accomplished only through the good judgment of the explorer. The scientific results have not yet been considered, but the explorer suggests it is an excellent region to study an existing ice field, and estimates that persistent observations might prove productive of value in the science of meteorology. The Canadians have been active during the year in the exploration of the vast territory to the northward of their supposed habitable regions. In the report of Dr. Dawson, relating the result of his labors in the Northwest, up to the date of its compilation, we find much that is new and a great deal that is of interest. We cannot enter into the details of his itinerary, but we may note as one fact that surely will excite surprise, the conclusion he reaches that there is a territory of about 60,000 square miles, the most part to the northward of the 60th parallel, in which agricultural pursuits may be successfully followed, in conjunction with the natural development of other resources of the territory. This does not imply that it may become an agricultural region, and should hardly be considered as more than a prediction that the pioneers who attempt to develop the region need not die of starvation. We have also to record, as a matter of interest in the Arctic regions, the successful establishment of the two parties sent out by the United States to determine the location of the 141st meridian, the boundary line between Alaska and the British provinces north of Mount St. Elias. The parties are located on the Yukon and Porcupine rivers above their confluence at Fort Yukon. They are well equipped, and it is expected they will explore a considerable territory and bring back with them valuable information beyond the special object of the expedition. Indeed, it may be said this is but the beginning of a thorough examination of Alaskan territory that will eventually form a basis for the demarcation of the international boundary. This country is full of surprises in its details, and whatever examinations are made must be thorough to be effective. Only recently a small indentation, as it has been carried on the maps since Vancouver's time, and known as Holcomb Bay, has been found to be a considerable body of water, extending back from Stevens Passage in two arms, each nearly 30 miles in length and nearly reaching the assumed location of the Alaska boundary. So perfectly is the bifurcation and extension of the arms hidden by the islands, that it was only during the past summer, when in the regular course of work the shores of the bay were to be traversed, that the extent of the bay became known. The determination of the boundaries of the land areas on the surface of the earth has ever been a matter of the greatest interest to the students of geography. It was the incentive that led the daring navigators of old to undertake the perilous voyages that in these days read like romances, and in the light of the more perfect knowledge we now have of hidden dangers to which they were exposed, we may pass by their shortcomings in the admiration we must feel for their heroism and endurance. To these men we owe our first conception of the probable distribution of the areas of land and water, but the lines they gave us were only approximate, and had not the scientific effort followed in their tracks, we may reasonably believe the progress of civilization would have been retarded by generations. True it is also that even today we have not that precise knowledge that is requisite for the safety of quick navigation, nor to calculate the possibility of the future improvement of undeveloped regions. The commerce of the world in coming years will demand the accuracy in the location of distant regions as great as we now have in civilized centers, for time will be too precious to lose a day of it in the precautions that the navigator must now follow in approaching undeveloped coasts. That these truths have guided those who seek to do their share for the future in the labor of the present, we have ample evidence in the activity of all civilized governments during the last century. It is a source of shame and infinite regret that our own government has done so little in this vast field, that the intelligence of our people has not been awakened to put forth their energy in so good a cause, that would eventually increase their own prosperity. But we have not been altogether inactive, and complaint must be in the quantity, not the quality of our labors. The establishment of definite locations for the control of sections and regions is the first step in eliminating errors that have been committed and in providing greater accuracy in the future. At a recent meeting of the Society, we had a paper presented on this subject, from which we can judge of the good work that has been done by our Navy in these determinations, and gain an insight of the similar labor that has been prosecuted by other nations. The bands of elective cables that girdle the earth afford the most approved means of ascertaining the longitudes of these positions, and if we but study a cable chart, it will be found the work yet to be accomplished before the facilities the cables now afford are exhausted is not inconsiderable. We hope, therefore, this good work may be continued, and that surveying and charting the regions thus approached will shortly follow. There is much labor of this character still required on our own continent, and we will be delinquent in our duty as a progressive people if we do not follow the good beginning already made to its legitimate conclusion. The duties of government are manifold, and for the benefit of those governed must include legislation that will make manifest the natural resources of the state. The geographic development and political advancement of our own country in the century of our national existence is a marked instance of the wisdom of preparing for the future by such acts as legitimately fall within the province of legislation. End of section 4.